to jump in. I'm going to quickly thank our sponsors and that sort of stuff. So my name's Chris Thompson. I'm the executive director here at Generator. I want to welcome you to another fantastic Reckless Ideas lecture. I get to do the fun stuff, which is thank our sponsors. Our first sponsor is our lead sponsor is a new sponsor. That's Hula, which is 150,000 square feet of office and co-working space right down on the lake, and a surf club. How can you complain about that? They're fantastic. Russ Scully is a big supporter. We thank them, as well as the office of Mayor Moreau Weinberger in the city of Burlington, another huge supporter of us, and we sincerely appreciate the support from all those folks, as well as Champlain College. This is actually a shared space that we have with Champlain College, and they're very graciously let us use it for events like this. So we're sincerely appreciative of Champlain about that. And just a couple ground rules. Peter is going to talk in just a few minutes, and then after the lecture we're going to do Q&A. And so I just ask that if you don't mind holding your questions to the end of the lecture, and then we'll do that. And when you're asking questions, just try to give everybody a little bit of space to ask questions too, if you don't mind. And more than anything else, definitely hang out, have a little more pizza, have some more beer afterwards, and talk, collaborate, do all the fun stuff. And that's that. So I want to introduce Melissa Rubinchuk, who is the center coordinator from the Vermont Complex Systems Center.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. I am introducing Professor Peter Sheridan Dodds, who is the director of the Vermont Complex Systems Center. Peter's research focuses on system-level big data problems in many areas, including language and stories, socio-technical systems, earth sciences, biology, and ecology. He has general interests in stories and narratives, language and communication, complexification, contagion, and robustness, and a long-term tilting at windmills goal to understand a theory of anything. Please join me in welcoming Professor Peter Dodds.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to tell you some interesting things, hopefully. I'm going to try to thread a few pieces together that I've been working on really for close to 20 years now. And so Melissa said I sort of indicated that I have a bit of a strange background, and it is a mixture of physics and then the social sciences. So I spent 6 years at MIT and a math physics degree, although I worked in earth systems there, and then 6 years at Columbia where I was actually housed in the social sciences. So that means that no one wants to own you. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about stories a little bit at the start. That's an enormous amount of big field for me now, and something I think a lot about. So I just want to touch on that because it is all sort of tied together here. I want to give you a little bit about how I think fame works, how fate works, and these sorts of things, how to become famous. So that's a freebie for you, no cost. And so that's connected to super spreading, how things take off. A little bit here about Zipf's law. So these are these heavy tail distributions. This is what I call the statistics of surprise. I'll kind of fold some pieces together there. And then this idea of lexical ultrafame, which is sort of the title of the talk in various ways, but something to do with Trump and God, and then some unknown quantity, although a number of you in this room will know who that is. Okay, and then this last piece that I want to get to is turbulent times, and that's this effort we've been going through to try and quantify how there seems to be a speed up in news, if you like, or just what people talk about, and can we actually put a number on that? All right, so I always like to point out my cat, Pratchett. So my family's here, and we're all big Pratchett fans. Basically, we're Pratchett's support system. Anyway, he's at home asleep. Anyway, he's a good guy. He's on Instagram, and he doesn't care about that either. Yeah, in fact, this is, let's see, let's get this one. He's very helpful. Look at this guy. Look at this guy. Just great. Very, very helpful guy. Okay. So, okay. That's enough of that from you. Nope. Stop it. Okay. All right. So, Vermont Complex Systems Center. We've been around for about 10 years. We have weird mascots and we have fun. And but it's a really, it's a very serious outfit because in fact it's really where science was always going, right? Trying to understand systems. We had 300 years of breaking things down, the golden age of reductionism, I would call it. We figured out atoms only 100 years ago. It's not long. DNA and so on. So understanding these systems we're part of that are inside us and all sorts of things we worry about in the world is where science has to go. And we're in a position to do it. We can measure things. We have the data. We have the computational power. That'll all get better. So that's our Roboctopus. We actually do have a whole educational thing that we've built up. So we're very much research and education put together. Data science is a new thing at UVM in the undergrad piece, but we've built out this complex systems and data science scaffolding, right? So there's a certificate. We have a new certificate winner here in the audience. Masters, and now we have a PhD in complex systems and data science. It's been extremely gratifying to build that up and see things take off. Some good things recently. We got $5 million from MassMutual. We have this nice relationship with them, connections at different scales. The CEO went to UVM, so it always helps. Some of our former students are there in the data science team. So this is a good thing. It's a health and wellness piece that we're working with them on, and it's so a center of excellence. Lots of other funding coming in interesting ways. We do try to really work on good things that are meaningful and help the world. We've got a team. I'm part of a computational story lab, and so my colleague Chris Danforth and I run that together. There are story labbers here in the audience. And they're all over the world. They're great people. They're doing all sorts of cool things. If you want to read more about what we do later on, this is an outside piece that appeared a few years ago that's pretty fun. It's really fun. Okay, so I have tarot cards. I'm not going to explain them any more beyond that, but that's just, they exist. So that will appear now and then. So the pouring data, right? And this is just to talk about where we are now. I will tell you about old experiments of ours, and they're in a sense, this big data era for social sciences. All these fields go from data scarce to data rich. It's a natural progression of science. But this is kind of, when I was doing my PhD, this is a little bit more where you were, although I did work on some big data. You get to think in your space, but then this happens, right? So this has been an issue, and you need to contend with reality, and then you go back to this. So pure math, you just kind of oscillate between here and here, or philosophy and so on, which is great, and you should do that. String theory too, actually. Anyway, but yeah. Anyway, we're down in this terribleness here. Yeah. Okay, there's these sorts of things. I had to sort of feel my way around, like, what is science, right? And it's really describe and explain, and there are these other pieces that come after. But describe has become really hard, right? Because we have these masses of data about things. This is a long time ago. This is Lord Kelvin, who, not the greatest person in the world necessarily, but to measure is to know, right? Really sort of stating it. But he said some other things, right? The physics is done. This is at the end of the 1800s, right? Just more measurement. So quantum was a bit surprising. So chaos, very upsetting. X-rays will prove to be a hoax, and my beard is cool. So, this is what happens in books. The quote from the famous person you like, and it apparently says everything you want, but you leave out all the other quotes. All right. So what I'm trying to do here is thread a few things together, right? There are this constellation of ideas and pieces. It's sort of a Lego set of madness. But I'm going to try and, for those of you who have seen some of this before, I'm going to try to maybe go through a different threading of things, perhaps. All right, so stories. This is huge to me. I think after thinking about social phenomena for a long time, I do kind of think of stories as being the sort of big piece. And people have all sorts of responses to this, like yes, obviously, or no, that's terrible, and so on. But I do think it's enormous. And there are these sorts of efforts to kind of show just how much of civilization is governed by things we've written down and passed around between each other. We're story believers, storytellers. And I'm going to sort of distill away from that to the most basic thing of just being talked about, right? Just talking, which is fame. But I just want to tie a few things together. I think this is all quite beautiful, right? So this is the economics being thought of as code. This is taking computer science algorithms and then applying them to real life. So this is a pretty crazy self-help book. And then this is taking fairy tales and then trying to help people understand computer science algorithms, right? So Hansel and Gretel and is in this example, it's a search algorithm. but it is deep. I mean, a book that we've had around for many, many years, that many of us, numerical recipes in C or Fortran. I mean, the word recipe is very nice. And then some more stuff there with math. Okay, so storytellers are enormous in society. I want to give you just a few lenses on that. This is work that was done at the Media Lab by Cesar Hidalgo and his team. And very simple idea, and you can think about whether this makes sense or not, but just go to Wikipedia, find people who are written about, and find out how many languages they're written in, right? So Tom Brady, 3 languages, Aristotle, most of them, right? So who's more famous? Da, 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 da. So you can play around with that, how much was written about them and so on. But in essence, it's just how many different languages are you written about it? How much do you spread across the world? And so this is for Japan. So you can play around with this. It's called Pantheon. This is for Japan. These are people who are born after 1950, so you can toggle all these things. And this is one of these little tree maps which just shows you where what category these people are in, right? So here's some scientists over here, celebrities. And I'm going to say that these people, comic artists, actors, right, they're storytellers. And sports are storytelling things. They're spontaneous generators of stories. And of course, as you know, Test cricket is the best in that category. It really kind of is, actually. But, so these are there are narratives to this, and you think about the ways people talk about sports. They're very much about scripts and so on. Okay, so that's Japan. This is the US, again, with that same restriction, 1950 on. You see the incredible, outweighing of actor here and singer, musician. These are all complex sort of storytelling things. Sports again here. Politicians shrunk down. Of course, they tell stories too. Okay, and then this was actually done by, you'll find this on the site. This is for the sort of globally for the world, different times as you can see. And you can sort of see the diminishing of politician, for example, and then the rise of these kinds of characters, right? So actor coming up, and in this case, sports becomes the dominant thing. So if you look at how a civilization becomes more complex, you'll see, maybe to start with, if you look at a particular country or a region, what's their history of famous people by this measure, you see, maybe political leaders to start with, and then maybe some soccer players and so on. And as it grows up, you get more and more of the storytellers, right? And movie directors, right? So you need a fairly complex society before you can become a movie director. You have to invent it. And then the most recent one is video game directors, right? That's a very complicated thing, and you're telling this pretty complicated kind of story. So you see that popping up for the most, let's say sophisticated society. A little bit more about stories. This is a paper that came out at the end of 2017. It's about a hunter-gatherer family in group people in the Philippines. I'm just taking this picture from this article in The Atlantic by Ed Yong. So, number of things here. Storytelling is the skill most valued, right? So that's the first thing. It's the most valued skill in this society, right? So it was a study asking people about everything. So that came out as the most valued piece, above hunting, for example. And then the stories in this particular group, they encode pro-social norms, cooperation, right? How to get along, survival, right? So they're about survival of the group. And I won't get to say much about it today, but most of our stories, it depends on your culture, but a lot of our stories are about individuals, and it's hard for us to think about how groups behave. And indeed, a lot of the work we do with systems is simulating things and seeing how they behave, how you emergence, right? How do you get collective behavior coming out of these individual interactions? They are hard for us to intuit. We really have to work hard to get those stories into our heads. And then the extra piece on top is that the storytellers have more children, right? So there's a super survival of the stories. The stories themselves are about survival. They get passed on, and the golden tongue people also get passed on, get reproduced. Right. So I thought that worked. I'll say, this is just a little nutshell thing. So fundamental events of stories that you see over and over, hatchings, matchings, and dispatchings, right? So that's sort of a core of so many stories we talk about. So you can think it's crude, but often they're about survival algorithms. Jane Austen is talking about getting married all the time, right? This is about survival in a way. And we get very excited about things like immortality and so on, right? We write a lot about death, Okay. And so again, the individuals versus group survival thing, hard. And all of these stories, well, I mean, we can get some crazy ones, but they're about what may have happened, what's possible, and what's unlikely, what you shouldn't do, and so on, cautionary tales. But they are dynamic paths. I'm going to sort of say that for stories. All right, so that's good. Another one of these things. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about fame. So these are contagious stories, if you like. And I'll just sort of boil this down. So Mona Lisa, incredibly, I mean, this is famous for being famous, right? It's the Kim Kardashian of paintings. And I feel like I've said something terrible there. But I should just leave. Okay, I couldn't help it. Anyway, so, but it's famous. And maybe some of you have been to see it. It's for those who have seen it, I suppose, in person, it's generally famous for not being that great, right? Surprisingly small and so on, all these things. So why, and it also took 400 years for us to figure this out, that this was the greatest painting ever made by a human, right? Which is sort of how it works, right? We think that. This is Harry Potter. Once your story gets made into movies and then into Legos, you've done pretty well, right? So, I mean, I don't think our science papers will ever end up as Lego kits, but, like one can aspire, right? There's Nobel Prizes and then there's a Lego kit involving you, which is, that's Doc Brown, right? Anyway, so 12 publishing houses rejected Harry Potter. Like, no good, right? This is not going to work. Like, why would we do this? And it was only because of the 8-year-old granddaughter of the 13th one read it at the behest of the CEO and said, oh, what about this? In some funny English voice. And she thought it was good, and they published it, and it took off, right? So how do you not know this? How do you not know this? This, in a bigger story, there are an infinite number of these sorts of stories, but this is a work by Quran that goes back and looks at the fall of Eastern Europe and says, people really didn't expect this to happen. It was shocking, right? Many of you were born after this happened. But this is, in history, this was very surprising. So how does that happen? And there's a lot of theory about collective action and how people come together and spontaneous things. There's lots of fun stuff in math about tipping points and so on. But anyway, I want to quickly go through how this we can understand these amazing spreading events that at once afterwards seem entirely reasonable, and we give all these reasons for why the Mona Lisa is the most famous painting in the world. And generally, it's intrinsic to it. It's how it's painted. The eyes follow you around the room. We want to give those reasons. We want quality to be the underlying reason for why it's spread. So there's this paradox, though. Why didn't we know? Why didn't we sort of somehow? Why didn't the first person who read Harry Potter just go, "Oh my God, this is going to be amazing"? Like, why is that? Now, if it's utter rubbish, and my wife has worked on a slush pile, right? Slush for short stories, and a lot of stuff is discarded straight away. Fair enough. So, we're not that terrible. Okay, so we understand bushfires. Sparks will start fires. Things take off. And it's a system property, right? If it's raining massively, then we don't expect fires to take off. We know about dryness. We know that this is this collective thing. But we're going to make these mistakes about, I'll talk about social fires and the social wild. And the mistake, in a way, we'd go back and we'd find the match. We'd pick up the match if it was lit by a match and say, this match is really important, right? We need to make another one like this, or like reproduce it exactly, because that's the thing. Okay, of course, there's a match sitting on the tipping point for Gladwell, which is full of all sorts of problems. And if you're an academic, you probably hate him. And, fair enough. Okay, yeah. It's interesting. He now says he's a storyteller. It's interesting, which is to say, but he's very much taken as as reproducing science. Anyway. Okay, so I'll give you 3 reasons and then a couple of mistakes. So this is from XKCD, if we have fans, right? So we're homo narrativist, right? We are storytellers, and we will find stories in randomness, right? You flip the graph upside down and we'll say, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. That's why that company went up and down. Right, so this is all sports commentary. They're very sure about it. And there's some rollovers, and one of the extra piece for this was, and more fundamentally, D&D, right? Because it's, Okay, so I won't necessarily play this, but this is if you're this is a Monty Python piece, and it's from one of the great treatises on religion, Life of Brian, and where they say, they want to know how to follow him, and he says, "You're all individuals," and they say, "Yes, we are all individuals," right? So it except for one who says, I'm not. Right, yeah. And they tell him to shut up. And then his mother comes out and she's very upset. All right, so that's a summary. You can find it. Okay, so, but individual narratives, you know, we don't understand stories very well. And again, it depends on culture, but particularly in the West, we're really good at saying, you know, that there's an individual that drove everything. It's much easier to understand, right? I mean, this is Leviathan, right? Like, that's why we should just have a king, you know, or a queen, because we can understand it instead of some weird group of people. I will play this. This is, well, you can believe it or not, I suppose. This is a lyre bird from Australia, and the lyre is the tail, but it is also an L-I-A-R lyre. That's a car alarm. It's a little dramatic. Hopefully this David Attenborough didn't do anything. You know, this is the devastation of the forest, right? So it's on one of our coins in Australia. My accent is messed up, but I am actually Australian. So full disclosure. Anyway, so we're amazing imitators, right? So this is the third point. We're incredible imitators. I mean, think about how we learn language. We don't necessarily learn it from our parents. We learn it from those around us, which is, you know, accents and so on. My children do not have an Australian accent. One a little bit, yeah. Okay, so we're really good imitators, but we get excited about this. We think parrots are pretty cool when they can reproduce what someone said 100 years ago, usually kind of vulgar. It's problematic that they live so long. But we get really excited about that, but we're amazingly good at imitating, and we do it in one of our sort of bad superpowers is that we copy each other and then think we're acting individually, right? So, okay, let me see if I can get this to jump. Madness. Okay, so again, this is the Mona Lisa, so let's try to work through this. So there's a book by David Sassoon that actually goes through the history of it. So here are a couple of mistakes. This is where we get messed up about fame. So if you go and see it, it's kind of small, and you're like, what's going on? You know, so if you make it big, it gives you people get excited straight away. It was stolen, so there's a history of these incidents, right? And then hidden in World War II, it started to get a narrative for us. And so, Leonardo also, his stock was rising during this time, being, sort of seen again as this incredibly famous person. There were attacks, so it developed this fame, and fame is being talked about. Okay, so we do, with hard work, uncover the trajectory of things that have become famous, and we can't, but it is very hard for us. We really struggle with it. Anyway, so if you really still think the Mona Lisa is the greatest thing in the world, I would encourage you to read that book. Okay, this is an old experiment of ours. It's finally published in 2006, but it probably ran the few years beforehand. Matt Salganic, who's a professor of sociology now at Princeton, and my colleague Duncan Watts, who was at Microsoft for a while, and then is going back to Penn, somehow is a professor in 3 different colleges. I don't know how he's done it. Okay, so what we did was we ran, and I'll just very quickly tell you how this worked. We set up this experiment, and this is pre-Twitter and all these sorts of things. So and I had about 100,000 people come along. You were shown, I know you can't read this, but what you're shown is this sort of array of 48 songs. You click on it and you listen to it, and then you could rate it and download it if you want. So that was the game, right? It's this kind of experiment thing, and you're allowed to. The thing with the benefit we're giving you is you can download a song and keep it, which was sort of a cool thing then, right? Apple Music didn't exist. Right. So that was sort of the payoff. And if you didn't like it, of course you shouldn't download it. So what people didn't know is that there were 9 parallel worlds, right? So there's one world where you couldn't see what anyone else had done before, and there are 8 other worlds where, as time went along, you could see the number of downloads of these songs. And in this first version, we showed everyone their own random presentation, right? So now we're running the world 9 times. So Mona Lisa is in is in all of these worlds, and we're just like, does it take off? And does Harry Potter take off in all of those worlds? And then we changed to this version where you can't see it, but there's a long list. It's a natural kind of thing, right? The most downloaded song is at the top, and the least downloaded one is at the bottom. And I don't have I have some pieces here, but this is one outcome. So there are 48 songs. This is their ranking, and we'll come back to ranking again in this talk. This is the most downloaded song. This is the 48th downloaded song in the independent world where you can't see anyone else. So we're taking them as people who are judging this of their own, absent any social input. you've got this really weak social input in this other, you don't know the people, you've never met them, but you can see the downloads. So what you see here is this big scrambling, right? So there is a song that most people actually kind of like, right? So that's one that did very well. There's some terrible songs, and I can tell you it was terrible. There's little garage band kind of songs, right? We wrote to them and said, would you like to be on this thing? And they're like, yes. If anyone wrote to us with a lawyer, we're like, no, it's too serious, right? So there are a couple of songs, but there's a huge scrambling. There was one song that came 40th in one world and first in another world. I mean, that's a huge variation in outcome. And we weren't entirely controlling, the quality, but you could then play around with this and really try to, get songs that were very similar to each other. And there are games like this. So this experiment's been repeated in various ways. It's been done for academic publishing, where you send the papers off to different groups and you get all sorts of different results, as you might expect. So you get these, the one thing that's not shown here is the more you can see exactly what other people have done, which is by showing people in a very clear line instead of a random layout. So that's like turning the social signal up. You actually get stronger inequality, right? So the most successful one in a world will be more successful, but it's less predictable, right? So there's this sort of paradox. It's less predictable. And then what we're going to do on top, though, we're just in one of these worlds, and this, Harry Potter's out here, and it's so much, further in front of the one before it that after it that people can't be wrong, right? I mean, people can't be wrong. They know what they're doing. I mean, we have inbuilt instincts to adopt what other people are doing for good reason, right? I mean, some of it is just survival, like do what the rest of the group's doing. You can't assess everything. So if people wear Ugg boots or Blundstones, which very good, then maybe they're good, right? So we have, and then sometimes we just copy each other, right? We can't help that as well. Okay, so this was this experiment that's become pretty famous, ironically, about fame, it's holding on. So we did one sneaky thing at the end, which was we ran one more experiment where we had our 48 songs going along, and then we just flipped the chart upside down, right? Which is more what psychologists like to do. So we flipped the chart upside down. So the song that was 48th is now number 1, and the one that's number 1 is now 48. We made a couple of copies of this, because why not? We can just make 2 copies of these worlds. And we let the original world keep going. So this number 1 song keeps getting downloaded. It's at the top of the list. People look at it. They also look at the bottom of the list, right, straight away. People do that. The 48th one is still, not good. But this is song 48, which has been, this is payola, right? This is where, you do whatever you want to pretend to people that something is really popular. And now it's doing well, right? This is where it was in this other one. And we know that things don't get sorted out. But now, the thing is, yes, you can advertise and corrupt things and so on so that your movie with Ben Affleck in it does well. And that's good for you. But overall, there's less downloads, right? In this case, there are less downloads. So the system performs more poorly because people are being tricked and or misled and so on. And even though on their own, there's going to be a lot of different, variation in what's an outcome. It's worse if you, coerce people. So mistake number 2 is you get away from this individual narrative and so on, and then you think, oh, it's all about how people connect and spread. And I have to say, I've been talking about this for an unbelievable amount of time, but many, many years, 10 years, more than 10 years. And Facebook's sort of the great example of this, right? So you start to get into the links and you say, oh, if we knew how these people were influencing each other, and this is old, goes way back into this sociological literature thinking about this, but now we're at a point where we can measure it, right? And start to, maybe piggyback in some way on these links. And there have been many efforts by Facebook over the years, and basically they've succeeded into monetizing people's behavior and their links. But this is getting into the links and messing around with that. Of course, this is from it's a Washington Post article. It's only half of the pieces, but this is a nice 14-year history of Zuckerberg saying he's sorry for things. And we'll do better in the next time. It's kind of incredible. Pre-Facebook even, which was good. Our hearts go out. Okay, so so this is the old theory. This is from sociology, old theory of influence. Radio came along, right? Big change, right? You have massive change in the way things are spread. Telegraph is incredible because now you have this sort of instant communication. It's still a struggle, but you're not sending a horse from one side of the country to the other, or a pony. In principle, this very, very quick transfer of information, but then you get radio, and now that's broadcast, right? That's a very different thing. This is, as I said, these old theories. So this is from the 50s. Katz and Lazarsfeld came up with this idea of this two-step model of influence. So you start to think of the media bathing everything, but there are these influences. We love this still, right? There are influences on Instagram and all these things everywhere. Sure, they sell things. That doesn't mean that the system really works well. But of course, it's much more like this. It's some mixed up thing, right? It's a network story. Part of what we were hindered with before was we couldn't measure these things. And it's still very hard to measure influence. It's still difficult. But if you're sitting on top of Facebook, you have a ton of data about how people are interacting. Twitter, yeah. I'll come to Twitter later on. We have 10% of all tweets, and I don't know if it helps us. Anyway, this is super spreading. And I'm just going to sort of state this, right? So it's much more about messages, right? And this is all work with Duncan. It's very simple. It's like a disease spreading thing. You want the message, whatever it is that you receive, you enjoy it for some reason, and you want to pass it on. And it could be a good or bad message. And obviously, this can be, used for terrible things. The recklessness. I want to say that some of our early work, because we're at Columbia, and Jonah Peretti, who started BuzzFeed, was good friends with my colleague Duncan, and he would come and talk to us. It's funny, he initially thought he could spread anything. He had this sort of big success with making kind of a joke about Nike and sweatshops in an email that spread all around the world. So it was kind of like winning the one-armed bandit when you walk into a game or something. The first time you think you can do it all the time. Anyway, this really is kind of codifying. These are ridiculous things, but they're codifying these simple little things that people pass on, jokes, right? So it's enjoyable. If you think it's funny, then you want to tell other people, right? That's a successful joke. So these are often jokes. So BuzzFeed comes along, it's full of this nonsense, but then it adds news, and it becomes a pretty serious news outfit, which was a bit surprising for people to start with. But news, of course, is a thing that spreads massively, certain kinds of news. So let's just talk about these words a little bit. So fate is past tense, right? It's written, right? So it's been foretold. So I'm going to say story of fate is the only thing we have, although there's a lot of complications with universality but basically that's the story. Destiny is probabilistic, and then we have these. It's just nice that these things are buried in these words, right? Fame comes from the word fama, which means to talk. So it's exactly got the right piece in there. So it's about being talked about. And then we have these in other words that mean fame. Renown means to say the name again or reclaim, right? To shout again. Actually, that goes back to moo, I think. Yeah, right. Cows. Okay. All right. Connected to lowing. There you go. Right. Cows spreading stories. You actually get contagion with whales too. Actually, with whale songs. It's everywhere. All right. Oscar Wilde. So this is the kind of fame we'll talk about today. Which is, there's only one thing in the world worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about, right? So one of his famous little pieces. He would have loved Twitter, I think, as would Dorothy Parker and lots of these sorts of people, or throwing their computer out the window, but I think that would have been good. Anyway, so this is just being talked about. We've done a lot of work on happiness and valence and sentiment and so on, but I want to just simply focus on volume of how much something has got the light shone on it. Okay, I'll just show you this, right? This is how to make things spread. This is the freebie, right? So this is what you want. You want people to pass things on. You advertise it, fine. And I'm going to say that, to do this authentically, to get something to deeply spread, to stay in a culture, you don't want to be messing with people's links. I mean, when they figure this out, they're very upset, usually. But what the video shows this, there's a little iteration, right? So you have some square, nobody likes it. Of course, you iterate. And the thing that takes off, you get in behind. But and BuzzFeed and all these other places have done this sort of thing just with, because it's much easier digitally, right? With headlines, for example. You put out 10,000 headlines and see which one takes off. Okay, so lots of things can go wrong, but it's about making things that spread. So I'll talk about the social wild, where you want to have stuff that has social value, for some reason it spreads, get out of the interactions. So it can all go wrong, and we've seen a lot of that recently perhaps, but forever, right? Propaganda, all sorts of things. There is this I think fundamental observation, right? Billions of people can be harmoniously wrong, right? It's an unsettling thing, but it's true. But here's the challenge. What's a societal vaccine for conspiracy theories? You would hope education. We could try that. But what's the like? It seems like we're just running around like with Snopes is sort of our one thing. We're just sort of fighting off like this miasma of conspiracy theories with Snopes, which is like like someone with a marshmallow gun, against Germany. All right, so I want to talk a little bit more about these uneven distributions that come out of all sorts of systems, not just social ones. And I've got my funny tarot card, but there's usually some heavy-tailedness to these distributions. Right? So let's play around with this. So diffusion, it's a famous thing in physics, and it happens all the time. Stuff just kind of moves around. And so this is a little random walk, right? This is all this is, a random walk. So if you take a lot of little random walks, and there's Price is Right has a version of it with Plinko. The Romans used to make a Plinko for themselves. People love this little thing. It's the theory for black scholes for the stock market. Randomness is an incredibly important thing. It gives us all sorts of stuff. Okay, so the idea here is we're going to let these little random walkers, this is some time thing here, and they just can go up or down, right? That's all it is, just a random thing, flipping coins. And if you set off a whole army of these little random walkers and you look at where they are after time, there'll be this normal distribution. So they're an incredibly famous structure, right? E to the minus x squared with a root pi somewhere. It's amazing. So very Gaussians, normals, whatever we want to call them. But they do occur everywhere, but they're pretty boring, is what I'm going to say, all right? And, we shouldn't be, at this point, unhappy to see them, but they're kind of boring. So even in just simple randomness, and this is something I have in one of my courses, there's some really fantastic, delicious stuff that's very surprising. So for example, if you have you're playing a little game, right? So coins, you flip a head, you go up. Tail, you go down. You're playing with someone, right? So you're winning if you're up here. They're winning if they're down here. So if you flip a head to start with, right? So you're in front. I think it's pretty good. The expected time to come back to here is infinite. That's the weird thing, right? You can certainly imagine like you flip a tail straight away. Like 50% of the time you'll come back, right? But this is called a first return thing. So you imagine all these little walkers. What's the probability that this walker comes back after some time t? It's a random walk. It should come back kind of quickly, but on average, the average time for all of those random walkers is infinite. They will come back. There are different framings of this depending on your era. This is a drunkard's walk, right? Or your friend perhaps these days is texting and they're just lurching around on the sidewalk. And then what's the probability they come back? Well, you'll always get them back, but it will take an infinite amount of time on average, which is weird. So they're really strange things just sitting in randomness, and randomness is all around, bouncing around, and structure comes out of it. I just want to point to that. Okay, see? So we have postcards from places we visit. This is the Snormals. Lots of these, they're everywhere. But this is kind of reality, right? For the things we really worry about, it's the statistics of surprise, right? So this is the terrain that we live on. There's a sort of a Princess Bride kind of touch in some of this. And this is the thing I just showed you, just a random walk. So random walks, they're fine. We just have a normal distribution, the forest of forgettable events. But this is the kinds of things we see in lots of systems is this kind of jaggedness, right? And it's like things can go pop and explode, trees of unusual size. All right, so I'll give you a few kind of robust examples of this. This is really random, but it is about randomness, so fair enough. This is a great paper in Nature from 1999, where they used random walks on a hexagonal lattice to actually to figure out all the reasonable neckties for men, which is pretty great. And they discovered a few new ones that people hadn't tied. And I actually fixed up how I tied the Windsor. Anyway, so there you go. That's a fun thing. All right, that's a little deep. Randomness is great, and that was a gift. Okay, so long tail. So this is a great study from 2011. This is to get at how we don't understand these kinds of distributions, right? So we're talking about things, the distributions behind earthquake sizes, financial collapse disasters, wealth inequality, right? If you randomly select someone from the US, how much money do they have or wealth do they have? This is a classic example, right? It's going to be a really long tail. Most of the time you get people, too much money, But there is Bill Gates sitting in there somewhere and Jeff Bezos, so you could pull them out. And if you sort of were, if this was connected to like some explosion or something, you'd be really surprised. But if it was by their height, not so boring, right? You never get someone who's 10,000 times taller than someone else or 1,000,000 times taller. But that's what you get from the sampling, and it grows over time. You get all these like little ones, you're like, oh, this isn't so bad. And then there's one that's 10 times as big. We codify it, maybe the best way we do that is in floods, the idea of a 100-year flood or a 1,000-year flood, which we then usually end up saying, well, the 100-year flood happens every 10 years now, and we're very confused. Right. Climate change is awesome. So money is belief, and so here are these questions that in this paper they asked. So there were Dan Ariely, you might know him, he's pretty famous for some of his books he's put out, Irrational Rationality or something. Mike Norton, who's at the Harvard Business School. So they asked people to estimate, and I get people to do this in my class, estimate the wealth owned by individuals grouped into quintiles. No one knows what quintiles are, so this is this helps you a little bit. And then what do you believe people should own? So this, we're going to get a little intense there. And I have a whole collection over many years now of what people say to this. But the idea is, the extremes would be, if you're estimating, there's one person who has all the money, right? So 100% of the wealth is in that top quintile, or it's just some of that 20% and no one else has any. And then everyone has the same amount, it'd be 20, 20, 20, 20, like this. So the quintiles, fifths of 100. So whatever you put down, the number has to decrease, right? So the wealthiest one is the first quintile. All right, so this is what they found. So it's a survey, it's a simple survey. This is the actual, and this is for maybe, I think it's around about, after 2000. It's, some estimate of the actual wealth distribution. This is what it was like, right? So this is 85% had, the top 20% has 85% of the wealth. The next 20% has about 10% of the wealth. The next 20%, so now we're going from 40 to 60, only has about 5%, and you can't see the bottom 40%, right? Now, this is more well understood, perhaps, because people talk about the 1%, sort of, but the 1% says nothing. Like there is 1% of everything, it doesn't really tell you things. There's variations connected to this, like the 80-20 rule or the 90-10 rule. People will invoke these things, which kind of get at a little bit of these distributions, but they're bigger and wilder than that. They're much richer things. So, okay, so this is what people estimated, right? So they're off, right? So they have the bottom 20% has some, right? And then the top 20%, and then the ideal, this is like way beyond Scandinavia. I mean, this is totally insane. And these are Americans. Like, what's going on, right? So this is a really weird study because I kind of disarmed them. And then the next result that's pretty great with this is, and I know this might be a bit hard to see, again, this is the actual distribution of wealth. And this is estimated, broken down into categories, right? So I'll just tell you what they are. This is people earning less than 50K, 50 to 100, or greater than 100. So you see they're very similar. They do have the trend you might expect, right? That people who are wealthier tend to think there's more wealth in the top 20%, but it's not really varying much. These are people who voted for Bush, voted for Kerry, women versus men. So Bush versus Kerry, that makes sense in that's interesting. But anyway, the thing is there's not much variation here. And this is the ideal for that same set of people broken into the same categories. Not much variation either as well. So this is a really weird thing where you've asked people a question which you would think would be very polarizing, but you've asked in a way that, kind of threw them off. Anyway, so the 1% framing doesn't make any sense, but we can talk about it. Okay. God, this is ridiculous. Okay, we'll show you. Oh, the cat is next to this. And that's an ice cream maker in the background. I'm showing you my pedagogy. You have to, yeah, right. Too easy. Okay, Boggle's a great game. Actually, I have a Boggle. I have a travel Boggle in my bag at all times. Okay, I'm going to point Zipf's law. Zipf is a very interesting character. It's 1949. This great work of his came out. A bit of a interesting. Not that much known about him, but he's other than his work, and he passed away the next year, only age 50. He was at Harvard. Very interested in, he's a linguist actually, and he was thinking about word usage, right? And so we'll talk about words in the remainder of all this. But he started to realize that if you take whatever system you have and you look at its components, so we could take Moby Dick and break it into words, terrible thing to do, but reading it might be more laborious. So it's a fair option. But you count up all the these and all the Mobies and all the whales and all the Nantuckets, and then you could put them alphabetically or whatever, but let's say you order them from the ones that are most frequent to the most infrequent. Now, language is pretty, it's a good example of these things, but it has stuff that's quite weird. So there we have all the words, and then we can make a lexicon, which is just, we have, what are the words in our book? So we just make a straight list. So we don't put the numbers. It's just the, Moby, call, me, Ishmael. All right. So that's your list of words. And then you go over and say, well, how many of these words appear once in a text? And this is not just Moby Dick, this is very general. Half of those words in this list you have will only appear once. Hapax legomena. It's pretty weird. It's quite strange. The word the usually appears 3 to 4% of the time. Maybe 6 words will account for 20% of all of the words. Maybe 150 words will account for 50% of them. If you're a journalist, you get paid by a word, so 20% of your income will come from the and of and a, which is weird. But don't tell anyone, because they wouldn't pay. I'm sure they wouldn't pay you for the if if they figured that out. Yeah, it's a pretty weird socialist thing to do, right? So you don't have $20 words or 50-cent words. You just have, they're all the same. Okay, my wife's a journalist, so that's what's going on there. Anyway, this book is now back in print, so you can get a copy of it. But he knows about all these things, city sizes, right? It's not exactly perfectly true, all these things, but city size, you take all the cities in a country, do the same thing. You can take the number of species in a genus, right? Count them all up, all these sorts of pieces. So citations, we have a lot of data on this, and the science of science, which is sort of navel-gazing, but pretty interesting thing to work on, has been actually going on for about 100 years and feeds into this bibliometrics, the science of bibliometrics. Very interesting. So this is from Nature, the journal Nature. It's hard to read this, but these are all papers ever written, right? And so they're not indexed in any way by how much they've been read. We're just going to take every paper that's ever been written at this point, stack them, and they're ordered by their citation count, right? So my cited paper is up the top, and that's on extracting proteins, and it's 300,000 citations, which is pretty good. And that's sort of the same thing. And what you actually see in the top 100, this is the top 100 papers, they're up there. The top 100 papers, most of them are about methods. They're actually about how to do science, statistical methods, lots of things with proteins. They're about scientific methods, scientific papers about doing science. So that makes sense, but Einstein's papers aren't in there, and DNA, the discovery of DNA, they're not in the top 100. You sort of think they are. They get great popularity, of course. They do well for themselves, but not in citations. So this up to here, it's hard to see, but that bar there, these papers have 0 citations. Not a biscuit, right? Nothing. Yeah, no one cares. These ones have, I think, like 1 to 3 up to here. So Google Scholar is what most of us use now to look at how our papers are doing, sadly. Do not refresh every minute because it's not going to happen. You can actually make a blocker for it. Anyway, so what they have, they give you a little score if a paper gets 10 citations, right? So there are various metrics associated with your little list, but one of them is how many papers got 10 citations, because it's like, it's awesome. Anyway, so this is very, this is kind of how fame works, right? And it means we can't really sort everything out. Again, this is a word thing. This is from an old corpus the English use, but this is to give you a sense of these things, right? These very basic words here. This is out to 2,000. You're getting out to some words that, interesting. This is from Jonathan Harris, who lives on Shelburne Farms and has done all sorts of interesting things. I would suggest you look up his work if you have not seen it. Just a history of incredible art science projects. And so this is exactly what he was doing. He's playing around with a text, a corpus, and then arranging words on this interactive thing. It was in Flash, so it's dead now. But the of and to, and you could play around with it and then zoom in on things, right? He did a sneaky thing too, which is to see which words people search for and you can probably guess what they searched for. Okay, people. And then people did sort of the Bible code 2 thing, where they started to find little patterns of words. It's really silly. Okay. All right, so language, so you need all these tools of these rare words. They're very important, right? And so this is from XKCD again. This is trying to describe everything or a whole bunch of things with, given some basic corpus to start with, only words that appear in the top 1,000 of that. So upgoer 5, that's this rocket. It's really a boat that goes under a sea is a submarine, right? So it was a ridiculous game that he made himself do. It was sort of quite torturous. Machines for shooting boats, so that's torpedoes. The evacuating chambers, empty rooms. Anyway, it's really, it's quite charming. But it's a struggle. You need all of these rare words, right? They're very information rich, but you don't use them that much. You can play around. This is an interesting thing to test your vocab. I think it's still online, where they ask you a bunch of words, and if you get them all right, it sort of pushes you further out into the distribution, because you're not going to ask someone 40,000 words, right? That's going to take a long time. So how do you sample from these things properly? I ran it by Jacques Bailey, who some of you might know, but he's in classics here, and he's the, if you don't know this, I'm happy to tell you, he's the spelling bee question asker. Is that what he is, the spelling bee? What do we call him? The pronouncer. He's the pronouncer for the Scripps spelling bee, which he won in like 1981 with a lucubrate, which means to study into the night. Midnight oil is the word in there. Anyway, so he has a very large vocabulary. I think you can get an A in his class if you can give him a word he can't spell. Okay, here you go, which is a fair game. I don't think anyone's won that. Earthquakes, right? Again, lots of different things. This is one of these heavy tail distributions. Most of the time, things don't happen. Okay, so we're going to get to fame. And here's our question mark, people. It is BTS. Okay, so K-pop fans. I mean, I just have to report on the truth of Twitter, which is that K-pop rules, basically, right? So, and in particular, BTS. Okay, this article in Vox, I was just Googling for pictures because that's fun. And this just appeared today, right? So the US is trying to understand what's going on with BTS. But the rest of the world is very excited about this. So pretty much. No, they're big in the US as well, right? They were just on Saturday Night Live, I think, and doing all sorts of, the Grammys, huge. Okay, so Korean pop, unbelievable. Unbelievable. And I'll show you some, I don't really understand like how much they've been talked about. Okay, so this is a little effort to look at fame. Just again, this is about being talked about. And I'll have some puzzle things after, inspired by Michael, who's in the audience, I think. So this is Obama being talked about. And I kind of set those things up a little bit to maybe help with this. This is a logarithmic scale. So this is 1 million, 100,000, 10,000, 1,000. And we'll keep that throughout. 100, 10, and 1, right? So these are where the and of and those words are here. Now these are the words we're going to look at just on this slide. This is the handle for BTS, which is how they're most commonly referred to. And this is, what I have here are the main people who have run for president, right? This is an examination of how much they were talked about. Obama is pretty famous all the time, basically. This is pretty high. You see, his lowest point was Christmas Day, actually, in 2011. So, which, like you're up against some competition because Christmas is talked about, right? So, like, even Obama went down there. McCain, you can sort of see there's very high points here. This is his passing. Romney, when he ran, was usually down in what we'll call the lexical abyss, right? And so this is the God level figure. And the reason that we came across God is that it's here, right? God is usually about the 300th most common word this is day level. And so I guess but it's sitting there, and most of the words in that top 1,000 are function words. Now we're not just taking English, we're taking every language you can find on Twitter as well. Right, so there's Arabic, there's all sorts of stuff pushing in. You don't have to worry about these too much, but I'll put on all of these graphs this God level, right, which is this dashed line. So this is ultra fame if you're up here. You're being talked about a lot. So it makes sense that around these elections, people are being talked about. So Hillary is talked about. You see her go down, but never back to where she was before, right? So this is a phase change for how she's talked about. And we can, the stories that are wrapped around, that's something we're working on, like trying to do that in an automatic way. It's a huge effort to wrangle these tweets into a box that doesn't explode. We have a machine called Hydra, which is appropriately named. So you see Trump falling away here. This would have been a Celebrity Apprentice thing. This is talking about running or complaining about the election, and this is going down the escalator or whatever it was, right? So this is a huge jump. This is very unusual. And then after this, he is just in the top 200 basically all the time. I mean, he's sitting there competing with words like, them and basic words. Chicken is way behind him. Like any word you can think of that's sort of a remotely interesting word is way down here. Okay, so the thing that maybe politicians thought is this is the ascent of BTS. BTS is formed in a laboratory at this point, right? There's 7 boys who look the same, just put together. It was like 15 years old, I think, and the English do the same sort of thing, and they just went through the roof. And these are it's bots and all sorts of things going on. But this is around awards. This is May 20th. May in this year was extraordinary, right? There was a lot of things happening, but this is just being talked about enormously. And in fact, they were the 3rd most common word on that day, which is nuts, right? So they were, it was like the, and then BTS tweet. So Trump got up to 11 here, which is also crazy. Obama got to 16 back on his election day. Obama is 16 on the day of the election. Trump is the day after, because that's when he was most surprised, and the highest point for Hillary was the day of the election. All right, so I want to look at that in a couple of different ways. We're going to just take these and make it kind of a histogram, and to maybe help you understand like what these levels of fame are. I'll attach a few things. Okay, so these are histograms. So we've just kind of gone and scrunched all these daily points together. And so this is Obama, right? This is Obama's histogram. It's like, this is where he lives, right? Sometimes he's up above the God level. This is, I guess he got to 14. And that's typically where the word me is, which is nice. Okay, so on average, the word me is there. Usually his median rank is around where the word UK is. So what we'll do is we'll take the God level and below that use where countries are talked about as pegs. And then above that, we'll just go into function words, right? So A is the most common word overall because it's not just English. In for 10th, 32, and has, right? So this is R and has here. And then we'll move into countries because they give us so Kiribati, yes, is down here. It's usually ranked about 1 million. Okay. Bhutan, I mean, we know these places. It is US-centric, Twitter as well, so there's that. But, right, so America's up here, and again, that's going to be North America, so all sorts of America, Captain America. Yep. Okay, and then, so this is, so in a sense, Obama is like the UK, right? Although there'll be no Obama exit. This is his lowest point, was around what Malaysia is. And then you look at these other characters, so these are people who ran against him. This is McCain and then Romney. Romney got down to Guangxi here, usually around Haiti, Uganda really for McCain, but they got up to at and your. There's more competition, more words coming along. So although it still remains a little surprising that this is the highest that Hillary got to. I'm using the words that were most commonly used to refer to them. I feel bad that this is going to be men's last names here, but Bernie changes that a little bit, right? You need a name that sort of is not like Buttigieg, or however you say that. You want a name that's got some, claims some namespace. So this is Hillary. So so we'll break this into two things. She was more at Greece level, but after the election, she's where France is. And her highest point is where the word was is usually. Trump's highest word is. This is total Bible code stuff, but like is and was. But here's the thing: Trump after the election, before it, he's where Afghanistan is. After it, he's much more where he's above the God level, and he's where you have to equate him with a function word. There aren't country names up there, right? Country names aren't this famous. So the word's still. These guys, this is all about their ascent, right? So again, they got to 3. And that over that whole period, they're around about America, but they are ridiculously talked about, which I'll show in other ways. This is an effort to see how much they were talked about. This is before the elections, right? So there's 2008, 2012, 2016. Here are the names. We've got the first name, last name, and then the handle. And Obama was the most talked about, even though his rank wasn't high, but we're going to set him at 1,000 as a reference. And then you can see that McCain got to like 800 roughly, so that's a 5 to 4 margin for him. Whereas Trump, and so this is sort of trying to equate everything, to equalize everything across these different timeframes, which is a bit tricky. Here's Trump, 700, so not quite talked about as much as Obama. And again, there's more stuff being talked about here. But if you look at this, he's got a 700. He's got a much bigger ratio to Hillary. I mean, he's talked about it as 2 to 1. And we know, lots of studies and whatever you personally think about it, but the way they were talking about it was quite different. Everything was about emails for Hillary Clinton. Thank you, New York Times. Okay, so zeros for our friends BTS, but they're starting to take off, right? They start to exist here. They're not really competing. God is doing pretty well. And there are various ways to look at this. This is then just at the year level. And if you go for a whole year, then Trump becomes kind of the handle. He's talked about a lot, talked about a little less in the last year, but BTS. Off the thing, right? And so Obama, he was talked about enormously before the election, but then when it gets into it, he still talked about a lot. But you see, he goes down, right? And you see, if I didn't really show it, but he's up and down day to day, not talked about all the time. Trump never goes down. He is on all the time, in a sense. Okay, we don't have to worry about those. Okay, so I was going to show you a few little puzzle ones, and then we'll get to turbulence. So this is inspired by Michael Arnold today. Well, I guess I like to do these sorts of little puzzly things too. But anyway, I don't think these will be too hard. I can't even remember them. All right, so these are time series now for other things. I'm showing the ones for these politicians. These are just for all sorts of things. And you shouldn't know what these are. But you can see seasons in here, right? So we're doing a socio-technical time series. And it's really, there are these shocks, terrible things happen or whatever it is, the big events happen. But there's also an enormous amount of what we talk about that's driven by the sun and the moon and the earth spinning around, right? So there's big things that control our existences. So these are spring, right? So these are a lot of, I don't expect anyone to agree. I just threw some ridiculous ones in here. There's coffee and water and air, just to see how they're doing, right? Are they going up and down? Now, a little bit of this, you can see like there's some jaggedness here, right? So we'll get to that, right? There's a little more what I'll call turbulence as you go along in time. And that's been really a feature of the last few years, which you may have your own personal experience of and so on if you read the news a lot or too many tweets or something. But, it's hard to know, no one wants to read 10 million tweets a day. That's a bad thing to do. You shouldn't do that. That would hurt a lot. Anyway, we make machines do that for us, kind of. So this is, well, maybe you can get this one. Well, you know what it is because you made this one today. But you see this kind of interesting cusping thing. And there's a whole set of them, and they're moving across. So these are just simply dimensions of the year. Yeah. In 2008, we have just the start of that. We started our collection back then. Yeah, we have about 60 terabytes of tweets, high quality human writings, 10% of all tweets basically. But you see, yeah, they cusp a lot at the start and at the end. So that's nice things to see. Okay, what's this one? Right, this is Avengers. Just a funny little thing. So Endgame, which you're being forced to know about probably through all sorts of media outlets and everything. Possibly people who talk about it, but this thing is still set to explode. It's like 10 days away. Just interested to see how these things have gone up and down. Stanley, so this is his passing here. Okay, what's this one? Right, this was a good one. So this is the one you might, it's a pretty famous thing that's come up, it's television, and this is the giveaway here, maybe. Yeah, Game of Thrones? Yeah, right. So it had a year off, and now it's taken off again. I'm showing you these things, but then there's a whole body of work that we're doing that automatically tries to find events and group them together and so on. Veep doesn't get as much. What's this one? So this is terrible, right? So this is Notre Dame, and you see the spike for it is here and here. Paris is a little more complicated. There's the attacks back then as well. Okay, what's this? See, I can't remember either. Okay. Right, so we've decided we should have measles again. And so kind of crazily, so one thing, so you get What I'm showing you actually, and Jane's working a lot on this, is these viewers of individual words. This is from Twitter. We haven't done this before. No one's really done this, right? You can't get this online. If you go and want to find how words have appeared on Twitter, it's not around. You can do things like Google Trends is the best thing, probably just sitting around. It's a different thing. That's what people search for. And a friend of mine who works on Contagion recently showed me, which kind of partly inspired, I mean, I've done a lot of work on Contagion anyway, but inspired me to kind of make this one because he showed me this time series, much like this. What do you think this is? And it was a time series that didn't do anything much and then suddenly started to oscillate wildly through the summer. And it searches for bed bugs. Now, people don't tweet about that, but they'll search. People search for things that they don't want to talk about, right? So, I don't want to say that personally we don't want to do things. Well, we want to help individuals if we can, but we don't want to do anything that ends up being used in a totalitarian state situation. We're interested in sort of population things and trying to help the world. Okay. All right, tetanus, Ebola, right? Is the US going to have Ebola is basically what that is. Yeah. Okay, what do we got here? Interesting. Oh, this is fun. Okay, so these are, I'll tell you what it is. So these are online sites, right? So these are tech sites or, like social media sites. And so you might think, what is this one? These are good ones, I like them. Yes, it's MySpace. It's totally MySpace, which managed to delete most of itself recently. Just extraordinary. Right, everything before 2016 is gone. Like really gone, right? It's just gone. They just were moving servers or something, and they're like, "Oops, all your music is gone." Which for probably 99% of people were like, "Okay." That helps me with my job interviews. But it's interesting to see just Snapchat, kind of not doing so well. Instagram, which is basically feeding off Snapchat for ideas, is doing well. Yahoo manages to exist for some reason. I don't know why. It's still there. But some of these things are about to have big IPOs. Slack, Slack, totally normal word. All Slack's existence seems to have done is make it more and more, bursty. It didn't take it off. IPO, not really a thing. Uber is strange, right? So it's up here. Lyft is very strange to me, right? This is when I think they offered everyone free Lyft's home after New Year's Eve. But it had a real dip here, and it's just had its IPO. Yeah.
I was wondering if that was IPO.
Yeah, their IPO is right. If I've got it right, it's here. Yeah. It is weird. Yeah. I mean, what's going on, guys? It's a good name, it sounds like Lyft, but it's, when spelling, it's good. I don't know if these ones are going to have IPOs. Pinterest is, and they'll probably make lots of money. That seems to do well. But they're sort of funny. Okay, what do we got here? Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so depression, which has kind of slowly gone up, and it's got more JAG stuff. These are main medicines. They seem to have been going down. We're starting perhaps to do some work with the AMA on predicting health trends and what people are talking about. Here we see bad things, opioids. So in a sense, Twitter is expressing more about depression, but it's not taking the medicine. Okay, I got a few on the election coming up. So I'll try to structure these as the handle, and you can, the problems with namespace, and we will do 2 grams and 3 grams in these things. And then first name, last name. Some of them have pretty good namespace. But you see them come from nowhere, right? So this handle is not talked about. Beto gets, and his peak was back in November, actually. This is up to date to today, I should say. Biden, what's going on with Biden? Warren, who has all these great ideas, but no one, But you see how high do they get up to, right? It's not quite breaking into that point there. I've got a few more on the next one. So Gillibrand doesn't, these are, again, names that people can't spell probably, but they are good, solid names, and they really refer to one person. Not really kind of taking off too much. If you're interested in that, The Pudding has a really fun thing where you try to spell names of famous movie actors, and you get to see all the little routes that people went on and misspelled them. Pudding.cool, very nice. And then basketball players, and they're like Gyllenhaal, spell it, and people are like, ha. Okay, so Cory Booker, this is Bernie. So his handle wasn't, wasn't using it. This is, who knows, people just reference it for fun, even if it exists or not. but you see it's kind of tracking here. Howard Schultz had his little day in the sun, but did not use that Twitter handle. I guess it existed. Joined, 2000, like someone joined for him. Again, Howard, pretty common names, but not really getting there. Buttigieg, who totally owns that name, that's April 16 is his little high point there. So he's coming up. Castro, not so much. And then Gabbard I had. Okay. And this one is, these are just, I have another one I'll show you. There's one more political one I'll show you. Anyway, these were interesting just to put these out because they're all kind of going down a little bit and getting, again, this more jagged. These are to do with hurricanes. Michael has some beautiful work coming on that about terrible thing. But you see hurricane, right, being talked about, right? This is something that happens frequently. This is Hurricane Sandy spike, Irene spike right here. Harvey is enormous. And then this is really kind of shocking. So Irma was talked about a lot, but Maria just wasn't referenced. And it's very strange. Puerto Rico was talked about. We're still trying to figure this out, to be honest. It's we know terrible, the tragedy of Maria, right? The damage and the lives lost is far outstrips these others. But it wasn't talked about. And it's very codified these days too. If you're talking about a natural disaster like a hurricane, hashtag Hurricane Maria. You just do it. It's going to auto-complete very easily, so it helps bring people together around these things. Okay, so you know this well, if you can remember. That is BTS. So I'll show you a few music ones. BTS is Lady Gaga, who's sort of in and out of the news. This is Fifth Harmony, and this is their supporters. So it's quite enjoyable to look at the supporters' names because they eventually end up with some way to group themselves. BTS, it's BTS Army. So this is Ariana, big fan. Grande, and this is so this is a sad aspect of this is that the spikes for a lot of individuals and entities are about when something truly terrible happens to them. And so this is the Manchester shooting at Ariana Grande's concert. That's also where the word concert spikes, and her first name as well. Arianadas, that's her people. They have their little thing. But it doesn't look so great for Fifth Harmony. Did they split up? The people who did split up is the Jonas Brothers. This is actually how I found out they split up because I truly, and then I was about here when I figured that out. I'm like, I wonder about that. And so they died completely, but they got back together. So good talk to you. These are supposed to be big names, but they don't really pop. Yeah, so this is the Beliebers, right? They're not believing anymore. The believe is gone. But yeah, so he's kind of fading away. It had to happen, thank God. Okay, so what about this one? So these ones are, I'm going to say these ones are possibly quite very much glitches where someone is referencing something. It's a short handle. Some of you know what it is. But it's a political figure. And it's a handle that exploded just here. And it's really one of the top ones that's talked about now. And there's some. Any guesses? Fox really loves you. Yes, cheating. I'm married to you. Yes, AOC. Yeah. So I haven't been able to quite. I did a little bit of digging, but she's sort of given the handle at this point. I know she's been on Facebook for a long time, but got rid of that actually. And Instagram, that's her thing. Anyway, yeah, she went, so she's right up there above America, which is probably something. That's no good. That's like, yeah. Okay, this is religious, this is bad. I'm going to say it's bad. So God again, religion, Jesus. These are little hand selections. This is Pope. So this is one of the examples. Church. So you can see the weekly cycle in there. It's hard to tell, but that's a weekly cycle. Mosque and synagogue. The awful thing about this is, these peaks. This is a Boko Haram attack in Nigeria. This is New Zealand, which is dreadful, and this is Pittsburgh. So these are terrible events that spike these things. Okay, I'll show you a few more things. This one, this is interesting. Yeah. So it's sports. Yeah. So the resting state for Twitter, when nothing bad is happening, is sports, music, and celebrities. That's like reviewed like bad things have gone away for a little bit. Memory's not that long. We'll go back to talking about, Taylor Swift or something. But these people are incredibly famous. LeBron, who's not going to get, right? LeBron's in trouble. He's not going to get a big thing here. Not sure what will happen to these characters. But Shaq is kind of fading away. But you see they don't quite, right? Brady is not anywhere near the soccer players. Kohli, he's the captain of India in cricket. Anyway, so 1 billion people love this man, and he's a glorious stroke maker. Okay. Swashbuckling. All right, so these are some more sports people. This is tennis. Interesting little set of people. So Federer and Nadal, and they're still, they're talked about, but they're not quite as famous. And again, this is one of these things. This is Serena in the US Open when she lost and wasn't happy and kind of, got, yeah. So that's terrible. That's when she's most talked about. Okay, these are, what's this one? Oh yeah, so this just happened, right? So back up again, but I want to say that this is, yes, 219. This is, of course, just golf. That's when he got on TV and said, I'm sorry for what I did, and this is what I did. Yeah. Because we do have the time back here. Yeah. So actually, one of our early sentiment things was looking at sentiment around events, and you could see it dip in around the words tiger and woods. Okay, these are going to be political ones at the end, but they're very Trump-focused, so we'll see what happens with this. So Mueller and report, Russia, it's obviously hand-chosen kind of. It's kind of funny like how much this stuff is in here. Like Wall, it's kind of gone away, but it was really, really high, right? This is around the election. Caravan, still sort of fading away. How much memory is in this system? Collusion was up, but this is now, it's kind of peaked here. And then these are just sort of, so witch, right? Witch hunt. Talked a lot about. Okay, and I've got a few others. So white supremacy. I mean, these are amazing things to kind of feel like you should search for. This is unfortunately my birthday, personally, which doesn't matter, but this is Charlotte. In the meantime, I will remember the day quite well. It's Saturday, it's Charlottesville. So that's the spike for ridiculous words you would never imagine in the US, right? But Nazi and Nazis, these are different kinds of spikings. And again, you sort of see, well, I mean, it's a little anecdotal at this point, but this, it's sort of taking off. No one talks about Jong-un there. Okay. There was FBI Comey, Rosenstein, so he's sort of gone away. McCabe, right? These are kind of remarkable to see these words take up. And I know we all know about these things. Yeah, funny ones. Manafort. No one talked about Manafort. Papadopoulos is in here too somewhere. Maybe he's not on this one. Barr, right? The 10th of April was the peak for him, or for that word, I should say. Okay. Yeah, some other ones. Brexit exploded. MAGA is sort of taking off, and hashtag MAGA, you can see it's sort of a phase transition here. So hashtags are pretty powerful because they're just not things that exist before, and usually they tell a little story, right? They really, because they can have multiple words, and we're happy with that. Anyone want to guess what this is, right? So this is something spiked here and here and here. This is not a great thing, unless it's your thing. It's sort of to do with this. Madness. This is a conspiracy theory of some repute. Pizzagate, hashtag Pizzagate. But this is different. This is QAnon, and then they spell this in different ways because spelling is not part of what you do. Yeah, right. It's a mouthful. Where we go one, we go all. I feel like I'm part of a cult, but this is the what do you call it? The motto, I suppose, for for the QAnon people. If you don't know about QAnon, possibly don't look it up. But you probably should know what it is. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Okay, so but it's interesting. This doesn't spike until recently on Twitter. This is in 2018. This exists back here, but doesn't really take off. The sun seems to have set. Is that my? Okay, I guess that's time to go. Which I understand. Yeah, but it's a weird one, isn't it? I'm really nearly finished, but let me see if I can just. Oh. It is purpling a bit, isn't it? I don't know if I can fix it because I can't quite get the whole thing. Oh, okay. All right, whatever. All right, it's enough. You can see. All right, I'll just show you an effort to measure the speeding up of time. Okay, so this is a really boring day. And I say that because this is the day that the day before, the difference between those 2 days was the smallest of all the last 10 years, right? So it was just like nothing much happened as you went from that day to the next day. And these are the top 36 words. Not much happening there. This is the top 36 words on the day that BTS was talked about the most. And it's not just BTS. They are punishing the lexicon. They are really hammering Twitter. So there's BB Mass, BTS, and they, right, it was about trying to get them voted in to win an award. It's just insane. This is the lexical abyss. So this is this boring day. These are the first 12 words. This is out of 10,000, 100,000, and 1 million. And you see, these are words that foreign languages that didn't work in my renderer thing. But these are handles that no one really talks about. These have got maybe 10 mentions on that day. We get 10%, so they probably got 100. So these are just nonsense out here, but there are good words. I mean, enlightenment, totally great word, but it's like, off in the abyss at 100,000, not being talked about a lot. But yeah, quite reasonable words. Hashtag everything, that's totally fine. Charm, totally great word. Delegating, normal word. But again, it's a mixture of everything, hashtags, handles, and different languages. Let's just give you a sense of the misspelled fishes that lie at the bottom of the lexicon. This is maybe a little too much, but the idea is we can take the rankings, this is the rankings on one day and the rankings on another day, and then plot them together, and if they were all exactly the same ranking, you just see a nice big straight line here. These words appear more on this day than they did on this day, and the same for this. And so this is a little way of kind of throwing this out, and you can see Kristen Stewart Patterson. So this is not much is happening. This is a really boring little part of the last 10 years. And they're talking about that, and they're talking about some soccer games and some stuff like that. Nothing is happening, right? So that's pretty boring. But you see this kind of widening here. This is comparing two pretty intense days. This is the day after the election in 2016, and this is Charlottesville. So they're going to be quite different. You see they're really pulled apart. The days, these words like Trump, the is there as well, but Donald, Hillary, election, president voted, all these words are there, Obama as well. And then all these sorts of things. Nazis, Lady Gaga had a concert, so they're going to talk about her. So did Zara Larsson, so they're in there. Nazi, BTS, because BTS. But then there's Haya here, or Haya, I'm sorry if I've said that incorrectly. Heather Haya, who's the woman who was murdered. EXO, which is another K-pop band. Okay. And this is just recent. This is just something to show. This is around Valentine's Day, so it's the 13th to the 15th, and that's when Trump declared a national emergency. Right. So if you plot these rank distributions, they look the same, but of course the words are all jumbled. It's like taking an enormous pack of cards and then jumbling it again, but you've got all these new cards as well. It's a very strange thing to do. Anyway, you've got 30 million cards. It's a difficult thing to shuffle. But Trump, president, national emergency. But a lot more things happen on this. So this little thing we have here that kind of orders things, CRPF and Pulwama, that's the India-Pakistan attack. Pakistan shot down a couple of planes from India, and of course, that's not good. Jawan, that's another Indian word. So they pop up as well. It looks like there was an ad for clear skin, so that kind of got pushed in there as well. Okay. And then Ajax, this is about soccer, right? That was the day before. Okay, so there are these ways of looking at things. Okay, I'm going to say, I'm just putting these here for comfort. This is one particular measure, I won't go into too much, but this is trying to compare, basically what's the difference? It's like a distance measure between these distributions, and this is day to day, right? So you can see like this is slowly going up. So the days are slowly becoming more different from each other. And we can do this at the 2-day scale, and the 7-day scale, and the 28-day scale, and then out to 6 months and a year. It turns around, actually, at the longer scale, 3 years and 4 years and so on. It's actually not as turbulent more recently. But what we're interested in is, like, what does a week in 2018 feel like in 2013? Like there's this much turmoil in the lexicon. How much over say a week? How many days did we have to go over in 2013 to have that same amount of turmoil or turbulence or churn? And so this is really the sort of summary plot. This is one measure. It's probably going to change when we get it to a paper. But let me see if I can go through it. So this is last week feels like a year. When last week feels like a year. So a span of one day ending in 2018, in terms of how much turnover there was, feels like this in previous years. So just days, really, but then 1.3 months in 2013, which was kind of not much to happen. 2 days starts to jump, right? Feels like 3 days, they're not so different, but now it's at the month scale, even 10 months. A week feels like 2 weeks, 3 months in these 2 years, getting close to a year, right? In terms of how much stuff is just bubbling over. And yes, part of it is BTS's fan base, but it's also just all these crazy things like Space Force. Like there's just stuff that comes along. You're like, oh, that is Nazis and nuclear war with North Korea or not. These are 4 weeks going out to a year. And then once you get out to a year, that kind of is still like a year is still kind of feels like a year, right? But it's just that how much feels like it's happening. And I have to be careful with the word feels, but this changeover in language, right? This kind of this bubbling of language, which is reflective of, so Twitter is this melange of all sorts of stuff. There are bots, there are, of course, but there's news, there are people talking about their cats, there's just all sorts of stuff. And there's joke Twitter, there's animal Twitter, people who medically seal themselves off for psychological reasons and keep themselves away from the other parts. And very much political Twitter. Okay, so that's kind of where I want to finish. This isn't, a done thing, but and I've been like exploding my mind over it, I suppose. But I think it's there. I think we can kind of quantify that more than just saying it is speeding up. But I think we can get close to this way of doing it. That's my cat. Our cat. Okay, so that's enough.
We have time for a few questions.
Yes, Scott.
So a lot of this is based on Twitter feed. I mean, is that a representative cross-section of everything we talk about?
No, the last thing I said is sort of part of that. It is a melange. Like early on, maybe Twitter wasn't such a big deal, 2008, but it's the news is out there. And of course, their algorithms push things up in funny ways as well. I should mention that, right? Twitter's own internal mechanisms, which is a huge issue just all the way through these things. They basically set things on fire, especially Facebook. We do have Reddit. Reddit's another source to look at. I would say 10 years ago, there was nothing of a big scale to play around with, right? And the first thing we went for was State of the Union speeches for 200 years, which was kind of an interesting thing to look at. But I would say, yes, we've got Reddit. We could look at some other things. Facebook, you can't get at.
To go back into like the previous generation, N-1, go look through Usenet archives?
Yeah, that would be great. Because they won't have deleted themselves like MySpace, right? Yeah.
Question.
Microphones to it, yeah.
So you were saying that there are certain manipulations in terms of promotion of certain terms within Twitter, but my understanding is it also works in the opposite direction, and that's why I knew that BTS was definitely going to be at the top of that list, because one of the things that happens is that BTS doesn't really show up on the trending list,
Right.
unless it sort of
that's
accidentally.
That's interesting. Yeah. Twitter does do some funny things. It's unclear how they run some of that stuff. Yeah. They're always at the top, though. That's kind of the problem. It's not like they took off today.
Mm-hmm.
They're,
But in a sort of related question, you looked at a couple of earlier musical acts that might have had that type of trajectory. Have
yeah,
you looked
like
at
Lady
One
Gaga
Direction?
and so on and whatever. Yeah, and we haven't done this exhaustively. I'm just but it would be super interesting to do that properly. Yeah.
I was thinking that probably has the most similar shape, because I know that like One Direction fans were complaining.
The
that it
Directioners?
was- yeah, whatever.
If we should.
That
There's a
it
beautiful
wasn't
wiki
showing up
page
in
on this.
trending.
I really recommend looking at the fan names wiki page. Anyway, go
Very
ahead. Yeah,
strange.
it's great. So One Direction has been really huge on Twitter for us to like look at over the years. I will say that K-pop, BTS is the first time we've seen birthdays be like so pronounced that actually, yeah. But we have things like there's a sad day on Twitter because one of the guys left One Direction or something. It's like, no, it is. You know, you look at Instagram, like the way some of these take off, they like really go explode and go like this, or do they build organically? And there's, you know, and you can model how that works and look at the mechanism. That slow growth is very powerful, right? That's what you. It's great if you can do that. You know? Yeah. People believe.
Could you say something about the size of the data? I mean, could this all be done on a laptop? The amount of computing power that it takes to do this, and how much storage it takes to do this?
This cut down version. So we've taken all the tweets, and that's Josh Minot, Michael Arnold have been doing this. Andy Reagan, lots of other people have been involved. You know, just to process the tweets and break them into these zip distributions at the day level, right? So that gives you something that you can put on part of that you can put on a laptop. So you can put on the top 1 million words for each day. But you've lost all the structure of all the tweets. There's 60 terabytes, roughly, of tweets compressed, like squeezed together. And you know, we're building up, we've got this new machine where we're trying to build it up so that we can actually store all of them in a way that you could really search properly. It's just, they're all massive text files, basically. And they're in 15-minute chunks. So, you know, if you want to tweet about something, you have to go in and like search through all the boxes, basically, and you don't want to do that. So it's really, so if we can get to that next level where we can say, oh, I want all the tweets, you know, about whatever, cats, and it would return it really quickly, and then also give you something about what's around, not just that, but also like what's around those words and those tweets, and give you like time series. So at this point, we've just kind of got that, you know, here's the shape, how much is being talked about. That's the first thing. I know, it's one of those things that just seems like, right, you should be able to do it, but it's hard and expensive.
Time for one more.
I'm just thinking, just application like for this database, this huge data set. Like, could you use this to construct like truly original tweets? Because you can see this histogram of like you can tweet something no one's ever tweeted before. So do you think of these applications?
You can. Well, I think the biggest thing is you could totally do that. Yeah. It's pretty weird what people tweet when you go further out into the outer limits. Well, yeah. I mean, people do this very actively. Like the emulation and and then sell the account. Well, there's a lot. I mean, a major application is like how much is something being talked about and how is it being talked about? What are those? So we have this thing called Story Wrangler where we're trying to do that. Like, what are the stories around a particular event? First, you identify the event, and then how's it being talked about, and how are those stories potentially fighting each other? So that could be for a company, right? Pepsi wants to know how its new terrible ad is working, right? You know, or but it could be about a policy that you're trying to put in place. You know, how is it being talked about? And we've gotten to a point where you can sort of predict certain kind of reactions to things. So a mass shooting, there will be stories about crisis actors. Notre Dame. I mean, I guess we didn't say what the conspiracy theories would be, but you know, they're things like it was the Muslims were involved and da 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 da. You know, and there are videos, right? YouTube is in some ways probably the worst because YouTube videos they put up straight away, and people are very good at gaming the YouTube algorithm. And like the day after Parkland, if you search for Parkland on YouTube, it shows you 20 sort of by default, and 18 of them were complete conspiracy theories on crisis actors. Yeah.
Peter, thank you so much.
No worries. Yeah. Thank you.